So we're back with our unit testing lesson. So we've gotten things set up. So a few questions that I wanted to address. So I had to make a reference here to .NET duds.controllers. The other thing we should do in our unit testing project, because it's a separate project, if we go into the unit testing project and go into dependencies and projects, you can add, so if it's not seeing this, if you right click and choose add project reference, you can then reference the web project here. So you make a check mark, check the .NET Duds project and click OK. That should add a reference from the unit testing project to our web project so that we can discover the public items in our web project. So Mike, try that. Let me know if that resolves the issue.
Yeah, that seemed to do it. I didn't have any projects there at all.
Right, okay. So typically we would do that right at the beginning. So in your assignment, you'll create a unit testing project in your solution. Then the easiest thing is right away, just go into dependencies, right click, choose add project reference, and then reference your web project. So that way all the items in the web project are discoverable within the unit test project. Okay, we're gonna do, just close up a couple of items here that we don't really need. By the way, there'll be nothing on the exam about online payment. You don't have to worry about that. I'm not testing you on that. That was just kind of a nice to know lesson, something that I think was useful for you guys to get some exposure to, but I'm not assessing you on it, so don't stress about that. Okay, so let's go back to our controller. Let's also add, we're going to kind of simulate this. So we've got this view data. It basically works the same as a view bag. Yeah, I thought so. So let's add in here as well. Let's say view data. Message equals, this is a message from the controller. Okay. So we've now added another outcome, something else that's happening in this method. So we should unit test for that. I'm going to go back to my unit testing class, and I'll write one more test method. This will be the last one we do here. Void index index view data as message. My arrange is going to be the same. So Jeffrey, you said, can we do the arranging outside of the individual methods? Yes, we can. We will in our next unit test controller when we're unit testing the products controller. So there's a special method. If we add, instead of adding test method, if we're going to use test initialize, so the test initialize method runs automatically before every unit test. So if we have some arranging we want to do in all the tests, we can put it into a test initialize method instead. We'll do that in our next unit test controller. Again, we'll cast our result as a view result. So we'll assert our equal. So what we're expecting is this message. I'll copy it. And we're going to compare it to our result.viewData message. So we're verifying that the string in the viewData message property is equal to this string. So I'll save that, run my test. And our test passes. So the viewData message is equal to this string here. Now there's one other tool, and Jeffrey, this is coming back to your question. One other tool I want to show you that's built into Visual Studio. It's not included in the Community Edition. If you don't have it, don't panic, but it's useful. So you're asking, how many unit tests should we have? Well, a lot. So if I go to the test method, because I'm in Enterprise, this won't work if you're on the Community Edition. You go to Test and Analyze Code Coverage. There's a tool in Visual Studio that will tell you just how much of your application is covered by unit test. So right now, half of 1% is covered by tests, but we can drill down here. If we look in our web project and we look in our controllers, we can see the dummies controller is actually 100% covered. There's 5 blocks of code and all of them are covered by unit tests. Right? So index is completely covered by tests. And there's this button here that says show code coverage coloring. If I click on that and go back to my controller, you'll notice these lines are blue. So they're shaded in blue, meaning they're covered by unit tests. If I turn on the code coverage, any methods that are not covered by unit tests, like our products controller, everything is red, which gives us an indication, hey, there's no tests here. You may want to unit test these things. So we're primarily concerned with unit testing the controllers. We're not testing really the views or the models. But the controllers manage all the actions. So we should be testing those, yes. It's definitely difficult for rapid development, for sure. So we're going to leave our dummies controller now, and we want to start to unit test our products controller instead. We're not going to unit test all of it. We're going to want to unit test index, and I think we should have time to unit test details. And again, there's some code changes that the unit testing is going to suggest we make in here. We're going to also look at using test initialize, and then we need to talk about the database. So let's go ahead and make a new unit testing class. So down here in my .NET Duds test project, I'm going to right click. I'm going to choose add a class, add a new item. Well, I guess I can just pick class. It'll just be a general class. And I'll call it products controller test. So this is a test class that holds unit tests to check the logic in our products controller of our web project. So the same name, just with the word test on the end. So this just gives us a generic class. So it's critical here in your assignment, because you're going to do this, that we add 2 things here. At the top, we've got to declare it as a test class, and we must make it public. So we must add test class decorator and public scope to the class. And doesn't recognize test class because you'll notice this is missing the reference to Visual Studio Test Tools.unit testing. So we'll need to add that reference in. Okay. So we're going to declare a DB connection mock list of products and instance of products controller at the class level, because we're going to use all of these in all of our unit tests. So rather than having these things in each test, we can kind of declare them and initialize them globally. Okay. So we'll have a private read-only application DB context that we'll call context. Visual Studio complains it doesn't recognize application DB context. So we'll make a reference to the data folder, the data namespace in our web project. Error goes away. We're going to create a list of type product that I'll call products, which is equal to a new list of type product. So we're initializing an empty list, which we're going to mock up. Again, we're missing references here. So we need to reference now the models namespace of our web project. And we're going to create an instance of our products controller. So we're doing some of the arranging globally. And again, it doesn't know what products controller is. So just like we've referenced the data namespace and the models namespace, we've now got to reference the controller's namespace. So we've got all three of them: controllers, data, and models. We're now going to create our test initialize method. So this runs automatically before every unit test in the arrange phase. So I'll call this method test initialize. So in here, we're going to need to create, set up, instantiate these three objects. We need a database connection. We need a list of products. And we need an instance of our products controller so we can test the methods inside of it. We can test index and details here. Now, this is where we've got to make a really important distinction between unit testing and integration testing. You can name it whatever you want. You can give it its own name as long as it has the test initialize decorator above it, it will run automatically before every test. The actual name is up to you. Yes, you can rename it. Now we've got a bit of a challenge here because we want to instantiate an instance of our products controller, but our products controller uses dependency injection. You can't create an instance of the products controller without also providing a database connection. This is the scaffolded code, right? So if I try this here, let's say controller equals new products controller. Right, if I try and instantiate this controller, this worked in my dummies test, just call it constructor, but this fails with the products controller because the constructor, it requires a database connection object. The issue with unit testing is we're trying to separate our web application from the database. If the SQL Server database is being used, well, that's not a unit test anymore. That's a different kind of test. What is the name of testing where we're testing our application and how it interacts with another external component? That's no longer unit testing. It is a different name. Does anybody know what that kind of testing is called? It starts with an I. Testing our application and how it works with an external application. Our SQL Server database is external. Good guess, Lindsay, not quite. Think about the combining of two things. Starts with the letter I. You're getting warmer, Jillian. Kevin, you've got it. And that's called integration testing. So here's our web application. That's one component. Here's SQL Server. That's a separate external component. Integration testing is how are they working together. That's not what we're doing here. We need to do integration testing, but that's not part of this lesson. There are other components in our .NET DUD store that we might do integration testing with. There's 3 other components we've integrated. What else besides SQL Server would we have to do integration testing for? Okay, I guess that would be 4. Yes, Azure. Wasn't thinking of that, but you're right, Lindsay. There's 3 other external components we've integrated into the store. Stripe. Yep. Right. The 2 OAuth services. So testing the Google authentication and testing the Microsoft integration, that would also be part of integration testing. So we really have 5 components: Azure, SQL Server, Google, Microsoft, and Stripe. Testing those components, that's not unit testing. And even uploading the files for the product, creating new products, that's really integration testing because we're testing our application and the file system. So we want to break all those things out. We're not going to deal with those today. The problem is, how do we work with the products controller when the product controller wants a database object? And our web code, when our web code runs, right, it sets this option: use SQL Server in creating the DB context. So we've got a way around this in unit testing. Microsoft gives us another option in creating our database connection. Instead of this option, using SQL Server, we want to use an in-memory database instead. So it's not permanent storage. It's kind of like HTML5 local storage. When we run the unit test, we're making an in-memory database, and we can put some data, some fake data in there. That's what this is for. So we're kind of mocking up the database, and we're going to use that mock database object rather than SQL Server. Then we can unit test. So I'm just going to comment this out. So we want to set the options for and create an in-memory DB instead of using SQL Server, which would be integration testing. So I'm going to create a new DB context options builder. So we're setting up the new database with our application DB context. And instead of using SQL Server, I'm going to use the in-memory database. And this has to be unique. So I will just use a GUID. We'll need to add a reference here. It doesn't know, Visual Studio is not recognizing this DB context options builder class. So I just need to make a reference to Entity Framework for .NET Core. So we'll accept that reference. And then I can instantiate the context we declared up on line 18. So then we can create a new database connection to our in-memory database. We're still getting errors. Because we need to install a NuGet package. The in-memory database doesn't ship by default. We need to install it. So here's the code so far in test initialize. We'll keep adding to it. I'll just throw it in the chat for now. But we need to install a package in order to use this. So I'm going to click on my tools and go to NuGet Package Manager. And I want to manage the NuGet packages for the solution. I'm going to use the GUI tool here to install a new package. So it shows us the packages that are currently installed. I'm going to click on the Browse link at the top left. And I'm going to search for the word in memory, which should bring up this package, downloaded 57 million times. It's an in-memory provider for Entity Framework Core to be used for testing. So again, I'll show you how to get there if you got a bit behind. Tools, NuGet Package Manager, manage the NuGet packages for your solution. Go to the Browse tab and search in memory, all one word. I'm going to click on my package, and now we've got two different projects in the solution. So I got to choose the right options here. We don't need this in the web project. We need it in the test project. So select your test project. And if I read the description, it's version 5, and it says this is for Entity Framework Core 5 or higher. So this version is too new for what we need. So the version I want, rather than the latest stable 5, I'm going to pick the latest version for .NET Core 3.1. So I'm going to choose 3.1.10. Make sure you check off your unit testing project like I have, and then click the install button. So we'll need to add this dependency in order to be able to use this in-memory database. It's not there by default. Then I click install. I'm going to get prompted to accept the license, which I will. I should take out the read only on line 18. Oh, there we go. It's not read only because we're declaring it and then we're setting it. So when our test initialize runs, we're going to create a new in-memory database with a unique name. That's our first step in our test initialize. Our second step is create some mock data and add it to the in-memory DB. So we'll create one category and 3 products, and we're just going to kind of fake these out. But that's going to allow us to unit test the methods in our controller. So I'm going to create a new category, give it an ID of 700. I'll save that to the database. So again, this isn't saving anything to SQL Server. It's saving to our new in-memory database. You got it. Then we can use the dummy data for testing the methods in our controller. So for example, when we call the products index method, we should get back a list of our dummy products. If we don't, then we know there's a problem with the method. Well, we're not testing the dummy data really. The idea is we're using the dummy data to test the controller methods. So now I'm going to create the products. I'll just make up some IDs. Oops. Okay, so I'm going to make up 3 new products. So we're adding these just to our fake list here. Then we're also going to add them to the database. I'll put this whole method up on Pastebin in a minute. We're almost finished. So we're going to add each one, and then we're going to save them to our mock database. So after line 44 runs, our in-memory database will have 1 category and then 3 products inside that category. So that's our in-memory database we're working with. So now we can instantiate the controller and pass the in-memory DB to it. I guess with this would be pass the populated. One thing I'm also going to say, if you try to take my controller code for the assignment, if you simply remove all the comments, I'm going to know. Don't think I won't know. So now we can pass in our context. So there's our complete test initialize method. Create a new database in memory with a unique name. Create one fake category, create 3 fake products, add everything to the database, and then instantiate our products controller so we can test it and pass it our in-memory database. So here's the whole, I'll put it up on paste bin in case you've missed any of this so far. So this method is going to run automatically before every unit test. So now we can start to write the tests. We want to unit test together. Today we're going to unit test index and details. We're not going to unit test the other methods. You're going to unit test one of the other methods, but in your assignment instead, in the controller. So let's go to our products controller. So everything's red. There are no unit tests right now. So how many tests do we need to properly unit test the index method? Again, I'll just load it in the browser. I'll log back in so we can also see the result in the browser. If I log in as admin. So we want to unit test this index method. So let's make a list in the chat. How many tests do we need? You think we need 8? Okay. Well, let's maybe list the scenarios. What specific things should we test for in here? Okay, so yeah, we want to make sure that we get the view, and I would suggest we want to make sure we get the correct view. Yep, okay. So we want to test that the products that also include the categories get returned. So I would say we probably need 2 tests. Does the index view load? And does it show the list of product data along with the categories? Okay. So let's start with the view. We'll create our first test method. Right. Index loads index view. We don't need any arrange. So in this case, arrange is all done in test initialize, which I can never spell. So we can act and we can assert. So we're going to call controller index, and we want to cast the result like we did before as a view result. so we can check the name of the view. Just like in our dummies controller test, we'll need to add a reference here. It doesn't know, the class right now doesn't know what this view result is. So we want to add a reference to Microsoft ASP.NET Core.MVC. Okay, now this is kind of odd, isn't it? Why did this happen? This line of code worked fine in our dummies controller test. Aren't we writing this basically the same unit test? Right? We call var result equals view result controller index. Worked fine here, our test passes. Whereas here, we're getting an error. So let's look at the error. Cannot convert type system threading tasks task iAction result to a view result. We don't need to return the controller, Lindsay, because it's declared globally in the class. We declare it globally, we instantiate it in test initialize, so it will be active. So that isn't the issue. The issue is, let's have a look at our method. Let's look at the return type. When we scaffolded the controllers, the return type is an asynchronous task of type iAction result. This is a little bit different than our dummies controller. When we scaffolded this one, it just gave us the base iAction result class. The code is not asynchronous. So that tells us why this line works here, but fails here. Because our products controller is returning a task instead. So we have to make one little modification to it here. Instead of just casting the view result, we have to add the .result property. This is the result of the asynchronous task. So you'll need this in your assignment because your scaffolded controllers also will return asynchronous tasks of type iAction result. So now we want to assert .requal. Right, we're expecting index, and we're going to compare it to the result .viewName. There's one other neat little feature I'm going to turn on. So I want to run my test. If you go to your test method, test menu, there's an option called live unit testing. What live unit testing does is anytime you save changes in the project, it's going to rerun your unit tests. So I don't manually have to run the tests. So I've started it now. So it's now going to, not sure why it's excluded. That's interesting. Okay, it's starting my live unit test. And our test fails. Maybe. You don't have to turn it on. Yep, it's true, Jeffrey. That's right. But you can turn it off when you're actually writing the unit test. So my test fails. Okay, yeah, if you're on community, you won't have that option. It's fine if you don't use it. I find when I'm doing the unit testing, it saves a bit of time. And then I turn it off. So our test failed. We expected index. We got null. So why does the test fail? Don't worry about our test initialize. So why is the view name null? It works in the browser. We go call product/index, it loads the index view. Yet the unit test failed. So we actually saw this error with our dummies controller. We're checking if the name of the view is index. So there's something we should do in our index method to clean this up. Right, so it's returning data. Remember, this method is overloaded, right? There are 3 overloads to it. Right, Jeffrey. So let's specify that our first parameter is the name of the view. So I'm going to add this parameter here. And now with my live unit testing, I'll run it again. And now our test should pass, which it does. So I mentioned any return view statements, the first parameter should be the name of the view. So our unit test passes. So we said we needed 2 tests here. One test to make sure that the calling the index method returns the index view. And as long as we're specific about it, that works fine. Now we need to test the data. Do we get a list of products? And does it match the list in our database? So we'll write this test as well. So index returns product list. We don't need to do any arranging here. We can just act. So we'll call the method again. And then we're going to take the data that comes back. We're going to create a variable, a list of products called model, which is going to be equal to a list of type product in our result dot model. So where does this, oops. Sorry, got my brackets mixed up. So what does this model mean? Well, let's go back to I'm going to open up the view we're talking about. So in views products index, right, our view has a model declared at the top. So this view expects to get a list of products, IEnumerable. So when we call it from a unit test, we're going to take that model and cast it to a list of products. So we compare the model from the index method call to the list of mock products in our in-memory DB. Now we're not going to use assert in this case because we actually have 2 lists and we want to check that they are the same. So instead of using assert, we're going to use collection assert. So this is used for when we're checking a list. So we're going to collection assert dot r equal. So what we're going to check is our list of products that we declared up here at the class level. and filled on test initialize, is our mock list of products the same as the model, the data we get back when we call the index method? They should be the same. Whatever's in the database should be returned when we call the index method, right? This shows all the products in my database. I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in SQL Server. So it returns everything. So let's run the test and see what happens. So we're going to run the test, and it fails. We're just going to debug this, and then it'll be time for our second break. So what happened? Jeffrey, your products controller class may not be declared as public. It's not public by default, and the test explorer won't recognize the test if it's not declared as public. So check that. You've added public to your class definition. It's okay, we're all going to do it. Okay, so my test, it says I have two lists, but the lists don't match. The first element in each list is not the same. Okay, well, let's check out why. So I'll put a breakpoint here. I'll debug my test. Yeah, Mike, I think you're on the right track. But again, we can look at it in the debugger just to confirm. So products, I have 3 products, and it's product 37, product 64, and product 56. But in the model, we also have 3 products, but look at the order. 56, 64, 37. So we've got the right data, but it's not sorted right, which means our unit test fails. It should fail. Because as Mike is saying, remember, our query is sorting them alphabetically. So not only are we fetching the list of products, but we're fetching them in alphabetical order by the name. Right? When they appear on our page, they appear alphabetically A to Z. They don't appear based on the ID, right? This is 2, 6, 3. So the IDs are all over the place. They're sorted based on this field. So our test should be checking that the data is actually sorted A to Z, because that's the expected and desired behavior of the method. So I'll just stop my debugger. So instead of just comparing the products, I want to add an order by here. So order by with our lambda expression p.name.toList. And I'm going to need to reference the link library using system.link. Otherwise, it doesn't recognize the order by method with our lambda. So now I'll save it, run my test again. It should pass now. So now not only is the method returning the data we expected, but it should be in the right order. It's not ordered by ID, it's ordered by product name. So now my test passes. I'll put both of these tests up on Pastebin. I'm going to run the code coverage tool, and then we'll take a break. I will push to GitHub as well. So here are our 2 methods so far. The method should be 100% covered. We're checking that the data is right. We're getting the right data in the right order, and we're also getting the correct view. Now, the code coverage tool, one thing that's annoying is it doesn't refresh, it doesn't update. Still shows as red here. So if I want, I have to rerun the tool if I have it. I'm going to test and analyze my code coverage again. And then I've got to drill all the way back down. So now if I go to my products controller, it tells us that the index method is now 100% covered. And if I turn my code coloring back on, it's now gone blue. Because everything that can happen inside this method is now covered by a unit test. Okay, so we're making progress. We've only covered 6.9% of it. We're not going to get to the whole thing. That's okay. But we've written some better code, and our unit tests are confirming that the results of the index method are what they should be. It's about 5-1, so I think we're due for another stretch and a break here. So when we come back, we're going to do our last set of unit tests, which is looking at the details method. So the details method is a little different because we have a few more scenarios we need to test for. So we'll need to write 3 or 4 tests to properly cover the details method. Fortunately, 2 of them are very, very similar. So we're going to take a pause here. I'm going to upload to GitHub. We'll take a 10-minute break. And when we return at 1:07, we'll write the unit tests for our details method. It's also going to involve us cleaning up a bit of the code in the controller. Let's take a break here.